There is a state in this country where the mountains are so beautiful they make your chest hurt, where the rivers run cold and clear over ancient stone, and where you can buy a real house with walls and a roof and a deed with your name on it for less than a decent used pickup truck. West Virginia, a place that gave this country its lights and its heat and its steel for 100 years and got back poverty, opioids, and a population that has been bleeding out since 1950 like a slow leak nobody bothered to fix. Subscribe and let's start. Number 10, Thurmond, Fayette County. There are ghost towns, and then there is Thurmond, which is in a category so far beyond ghost town that we need a new word for it. Haunted municipality, maybe. Fossilized economy. A place so thoroughly emptied that the 2020 census recorded a population of five people. In an incorporated municipality in the United States of America. I have been to birthday parties with more people than that. One of them was mine. It was not a good party. Thurmond sits in a gorge along the New River in Fayette County, wedged between the water and the cliff face like something the mountain forgot to swallow. Getting there requires crossing a single-lane railroad bridge, which is either charming or terrifying depending on your relationship with heights and your opinion of infrastructure that predates the Korean War. This was not always a footnote. In the early 1900s, Thurmond was one of the most important coal shipping points on the entire Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. At its peak, more freight tonnage passed through Thurmond than through Cincinnati, then through Richmond. Thurmond sat at the center of all of it, a town of over 500 people with a hotel that ran continuously for 14 years without ever closing its doors. Not once, not for Christmas, not for floods, not for anything. The Dunglin Hotel hosted poker games that reportedly ran for years without interruption. There were gunfights. There were fortunes won and lost by men who spent their days moving coal that went out into the world as electricity and heat and industry and came back as absolutely nothing for the town that shipped it. Then the coal traffic declined. The railroad modernized. The road in was never properly built, and when the economic reason to be in Thurmond disappeared, there was nothing underneath it to soften the landing. The National Park Service manages most of what remains. The depot has been restored. The hotel is a ruin. You cannot buy a house in Thurmond, but in surrounding Fayette County, properties start below $10,000. Carl says the history is worth the drive. Carl has never driven into Thurmond on a foggy morning. I have. Carl would not say that twice. Number 9, Kayeoor, Fayette County. Stay in Fayette County because Fayette County has enough abandoned coal infrastructure to keep this list busy for an hour. Kayeoor sits above the New River Gorge, and I want you to understand what above means in this context. It does not mean up the road. It does not mean on the hill. It means carved into the side of a cliff face so steep that the only way workers got down to the mine was by walking 847 steps down a set of wooden and metal stairs that clung to the rock like an afterthought. 847 steps down and then back up at the end of the shift. Every day, in the dark, in the rain, in the ice, wearing boots that had seen better decades and carrying equipment that weighed more than a reasonable person would consider carrying anywhere, let alone down the side of a mountain. Kayeoor was developed starting in 1899 and operated in 2 phases, Kayeoor Top and Kayeoor Bottom, which tells you that whoever was naming things in Fayette County at the turn of the century was practical to the point of poetry. The mine produced coking coal for the steel industry and at its peak employed several hundred men. The community that grew up around it had company houses, a store, and all the infrastructure that coal companies built when they wanted to keep workers in a location that no sane person would otherwise choose to inhabit. The mine closed in 1962. The community emptied. The structures began their conversation with gravity, which in West Virginia is a conversation that gravity always wins eventually. Today, Kayeoor is a hiking destination within New River Gorge National Park. The ruins of the coke ovens are still there, stone domes that look like something out of a civilization that predates coal, predates America, predates any of the things we think of as permanent. The steps are still there too. Hikers take them now for the views. In the broader Fayette County market, houses can be found for $8,000 to $18,000. The county has genuine natural beauty, and the national park designation has brought some tourism money. But tourism and cheap real estate are a combination that requires careful thought because tourist economies are seasonal. And seasonal economies leave you short in the months when nobody is visiting and the heating bill is not seasonal at all. Number 8. Caperton, Mingo County. Mingo County is the kind of name that sounds like it belongs in a Western, and in some ways it does, because the history of Mingo County is a story of resource extraction, company control, labor warfare, and the kind of hardship that turns ordinary people into either heroes or cautionary tales with very little in between. Caperton was a company town built in the coal boom years of the early 20th century and named, as most company towns were, after someone in management who would never actually live there. United States Steel had operations throughout southern West Virginia, and Caperton was part of that network, a planned community built to house the men who went underground and came back up with the coal, that fed the furnaces, that made the steel, that built the bridges and the buildings and the railroads of a country that was still figuring out how big it wanted to be. At its peak, Caperton had company houses, a company store, a school, and the full apparatus of a coal camp that was designed to ensure that the money workers earned found its way back to the company before anyone had a chance to spend it somewhere else. Company scrip instead of real currency. Company stores where prices were whatever the company decided. Company housing where the rent came out of your paycheck before you ever saw it. The mine closed. The company left. The post office, which had served Caperton since the early 1900s, was eventually discontinued, which is the federal government's way of saying that a place has become too small to acknowledge officially. When the post office gives up on you, you know things have gone sideways. Mingo County today has a median household income of around $23,000 a year and a poverty rate that consistently runs above 30%. Properties in the county can be found for $5,000 to $15,000. The infrastructure is aging. The roads are maintained on a budget that does not stretch as far as the roads do. And Mingo County has been one of the counties hardest hit by the opioid crisis, in a state that has been harder hit by the opioid crisis than almost anywhere else in the country. Gladys says you get what you pay for. I told her that in Mingo County, sometimes you get more history than you bargained for. She said that was not the reassurance I thought it was. Number 7. Cass, Pocahontas County. Here is where the list gets complicated, because Cass is not entirely a ghost town. It is something stranger than that. It is a town that died and was resurrected as a state park and a living history museum, and a place where tourists come on weekends to ride a vintage logging railroad up the side of Cheat Mountain and look at a community preserved in amber. The Mower Lumber Company built Cass in 1901 to support its logging operations in Pocahontas County, and at its peak, the town had a population of around 2,000 people with company housing, a company store, churches, schools, and a narrow-gauge railroad system that hauled timber down from the mountain with a grinding industrial efficiency that stripped the surrounding forests down to the root. The lumber ran out, the way it always runs out, faster than anyone predicted and slower than anyone admitted. The mill closed in 1950. The population collapsed, the houses stood empty, the railroad rusted. Then the state of West Virginia bought it. In 1963, the state acquired the Cass properties and created Cass Scenic Railroad State Park. The company houses were preserved and turned into rental cottages, the railroad was restored, and the old Shay locomotives, geared engines designed specifically for the steep grades of mountain logging railroads, were put back into service, hauling tourists up the same grades they once hauled timber down. It is genuinely wonderful. And I mean that without irony, which is unusual for me when it comes to anything involving lumber companies and company towns. But here is the real estate reality. Pocahontas County, which surrounds Cass, is one of the least populated counties in West Virginia, and West Virginia is not exactly crowded. The county has about 8,000 residents across 900 square miles. Properties in the county sell for $10,000 to $25,000 on the low end. The county has almost no commercial employment base outside of government and tourism. The nearest hospital is in Elkins, roughly an hour north, on roads that become seriously unpleasant in winter and dramatically beautiful in fall, which is the Pocahontas County experience in a sentence. Number 6, Nuttallburg, Fayette County. I know, Fayette County again. I cannot help it. Fayette County basically wrote this video for me. Nuttallburg was established in 1873 by John Nuttall, an English immigrant who recognized that the coal seams along the New River Gorge were worth a fortune if you were willing to build infrastructure in a place that actively discouraged infrastructure. Nuttall was willing. He built a tipple, company housing, a store, and eventually a conveyor system to move coal from the mine down the cliff face to the railroad below. That conveyor system is still there. It clings to the cliff above the New River, rusted and skeletal, a piece of industrial machinery from a century that is over, holding its position on the rock face with the stubbornness of something that nobody ever got around to tearing down. If you hike to Nuttallburg today, which you can do on trails maintained by the National Park Service, you will find the conveyor, the coke ovens, the foundations of the company houses, and the kind of silence that used to be filled with the noise of men and machines and coal and industry. The mine operated under several different owners and finally closed in 1958. The community had been shrinking for decades by then, as mechanization replaced workers and the easier coal seams played out. When it closed the way everything in southern West Virginia closes, quietly and completely, with no ceremony and no plan for what comes next. Properties in the surrounding Fayette County area start at $8,000 and run up from there depending on condition and access and whether the seller is in a hurry, which in Fayette County, a lot of sellers are. The county's unemployment rate runs several points above the state average, and the state average is already well above the national average. That is the kind of economic math that compounds in a direction nobody wants to go. Number 5, Coalwood, McDowell County. You may have heard of Coalwood if you read Rocket Boys or saw the movie October Sky. You know this town is the place where Homer Hickam grew up staring at Sputnik through a coal camp sky and deciding that he was going to build rockets and get out. And he did. He became a NASA engineer and wrote the book, and the movie got made, and Coalwood became, for a brief shining moment in the late 1990s, a place people had heard of. That moment has passed. Coalwood was a company town built and owned by the Olga Coal Company, later absorbed into other corporate structures, and it was a fully functioning community for most of the 20th century. At its peak in the 1940s and 50s, Coalwood had around 2,000 residents, a company doctor, a company church, company housing on company land, in a company town so completely controlled by the company that when the mine closed in 1986, there was no community infrastructure left to sustain what remained. The company had owned everything. When the company left, it took the everything with it. Homer Hickam tried for years to draw attention back to Coalwood, to use the success of the book and the film to catalyze some kind of renewal. A Rocket Boys festival was held for several years, drawing visitors to a town that barely had the infrastructure to receive them. There are photographs of the festival crowd standing in streets where the houses on either side are collapsing, where the church is boarded up, where the company store is a ruin. McDowell County today has a population of around 19,000, down from its peak of 100,000 in 1950. Let me say that again. 100,000 people in 1950. 19,000 today. That is an 81% decline over 70 years. The median household income is around $22,000 a year, the lowest of any county in West Virginia, and West Virginia is not a state known for high household incomes. Houses in and around Coalwood can be found for $3,000 to $10,000. Some are structurally salvageable, many are not. All of them are in a county that has been in economic freefall for longer than most of their potential buyers have been alive. Chad says the October Sky story is one of the most American stories ever told. I told him the most American part of the story is that the town the hero escaped from has been left to collapse without anyone writing a sequel about that. Number 4, Pageton, McDowell County. McDowell County is back. McDowell County is always back. If this list were a novel, McDowell County would be the recurring character who keeps showing up with worse news every time you see them. Pageton was a coal camp community in the southern end of McDowell County, built during the coal boom years and populated by miners who came from across Appalachia and from Europe and from the American South because the coal companies recruited aggressively and the coal camps became some of the most diverse communities in the Mountain South. Black miners and white miners worked the same seams and lived in the same camps, often in a proximity that the surrounding society outside the camp's boundaries would not have permitted or tolerated. That is a history worth sitting with for a moment. In a segregated America, in the mountains of West Virginia, Coal camps created communities of economic integration that were driven entirely by the company's need for labor and not by any particular commitment to human equality, but that produced real communities nonetheless. Communities that had their own social fabric, their own churches and schools and gathering places that were organized by race because the era demanded it, but existed side by side in ways the broader culture did not. When the coal left, that entire social structure left with it. Pageton today is an unincorporated community with a population that has dwindled to the point where it barely registers in census data. The houses that remain are a mix of original company structures and later additions, sitting on land that was never developed for anything other than housing the workers of an industry that no longer exists. Properties here range from $2,000 to $8,000. $2,000 for a house. There are coffee makers that cost more than that. The challenge, beyond the obvious economic desolation, is that McDowell County's infrastructure has been contracting for decades. Schools have consolidated and closed. Hospitals have closed. Roads are maintained on a budget that acknowledges their existence without fully committing to their upkeep. The county seat of Welch, which is the largest community in the county, has been fighting its own decline for 30 years. Number 3, Matewan, Mingo County. Some towns have history. On May 19, 1920, in the space of a few minutes on the main street of Matewan, a confrontation between Baldwin Felts Detective Agency agents brought in to evict miners and their families from company housing, and the local police chief and a group of armed miners turned into a gunfight that left 7 detectives and 2 miners and the mayor of the town dead in the street. The Matewan Massacre, as it came to be known, was one of the pivotal moments in American labor history, a flashpoint in the mine wars that would culminate the following year in the Battle of Blair Mountain, the largest armed insurrection in the United States since the Civil War. The police chief who stood with the miners that day was Sid Hatfield. Yes, those Hatfields. The feud was over, but apparently the disposition was hereditary. Matewan today has a population of around 450 people. The main street is a National Historic Landmark. The Matewan Development Center has worked for decades to use the town's history as an economic engine. And there is a small but genuine heritage tourism operation built around the mine wars and the massacre and the labor history that most American schools spend approximately 4 minutes on before moving on to something more comfortable. Houses in Matewan can be found for $8,000 to $20,000. The town sits on the Tug Fork of the Big Sandy River, on the Kentucky border, in a narrow floodplain that has been underwater more times than anyone wants to count. Flooding is not a risk in Matewan, it is a recurring event. After the devastating floods that have swept through southern West Virginia multiple times in recent decades, flood zone designations have been redrawn, insurance costs have risen, and some properties simply cannot be insured at any price. The history is real, and it is extraordinary, and it is free. The house is $8,000. The flood insurance, if you can get it, is not. Number 2, Gary, McDowell County. Of course, McDowell County is back. Did you think it was done? McDowell County is never done. Gary, West Virginia was built by United States Steel beginning in 1902 and named after Elbert Henry Gary, the chairman of United States Steel. Because when a corporation builds an entire city from nothing, it names the city after itself by proxy. Gary, Indiana exists for the same reason. There are a lot of American cities named after the priorities of early 20th century corporate America, and if you look at where most of them are now, you can form your own conclusions about the legacy of that era. United States Steel did not build a coal camp in Gary. They built a city. They built multi-story company housing with indoor plumbing. They built a hospital. They built churches in a row, one for each denomination, so no one had to worship with someone whose theology they disagreed with, which says something interesting about either the company's sensitivity or its productivity concerns. They built theaters and a commissary that operated like a department store and a system of numbered communities, Gary 1 through Gary 7, each its own neighborhood in a planned city that stretched along a narrow mountain hollow for miles. At its peak, the Gary communities housed around 10,000 people. The mines produced millions of tons of coal. The infrastructure was, by the standards of the time and place, genuinely impressive. United States Steel began winding down operations in the 1960s and 70s. The mines closed, the hospital closed, the theater closed. The company, having extracted what the mountains had to offer, extracted itself as well, and left behind the housing and the streets and the community buildings and roughly 10,000 fewer reasons to be there. Today, Gary is an unincorporated community with a population somewhere around 700 people, down from 10,000, which is a 93% decline and should probably be studied by someone with a doctorate and a research grant and a tolerance for heartbreaking data sets. Houses in Gary can be found for $3,000 to $12,000. Some of them are original United States Steel Company buildings, solidly constructed from the 1910s and 20s, with thick walls and craftsmanship that reflects the fact that the company, whatever its sins, built things to last. The problem is that lasting and livable are two different things when a building has been vacant for 30 years in a West Virginia hollow where the humidity never really takes a day off. The nearest hospital for Gary residents is in Welch, about 12 miles away. The nearest hospital for Welch residents is sometimes Welch if the Welch Hospital has not closed again, which it has done several times, reopening under different management and closing again with a regularity that suggests the problem is not management, but geography and economics, and the fundamental difficulty of running a hospital in a county that has lost 80% of its population and the tax base that came with them. Number 1, McDowell County. I am not giving you a single town for number 1. I am giving you an entire county because McDowell County deserves to be understood as a complete thing, as the full picture of what happens when an economy built on a single resource collapses and the country that consumed that resource for 100 years quietly looks the other way. In 1950, McDowell County had a population of 98,000 people. It was the heart of the billion-dollar coal field. It had hospitals, department stores, theaters, hotels, a newspaper, and the kind of civic infrastructure that a county of nearly 100,000 people builds when it genuinely believes the good times are permanent. The good times were not permanent. By 2000, the population was 50,000. By 2010, 35,000. By 2020, 19,000. That trajectory does not look like decline. It looks like a cliff with nobody standing at the bottom to catch anything. The median household income is approximately $22,000 a year. The poverty rate hovers around 35%. The county has been formally designated a healthcare shortage area, which is the government's careful, bureaucratic way of saying that people are sick, and there is nobody close enough to help them. Properties can be found for $2,000 to $15,000. Some are in communities that exist in census records, but barely exist on the ground. Old coal camp names on roads that go nowhere they used to go. The opioid crisis arrived on top of everything else. Pharmaceutical distributors shipped millions of pills into a county that was already devastated, already watching its young people leave, already running out of reasons to stay. The result was an overdose rate that put McDowell County on national maps in the worst possible way. The cameras came, the cameras left, the crisis did not. You can buy a house here for less than most people spend on a long weekend. The mountains are real. The people who remain are extraordinary. But the distance between where you are and where the help is will matter eventually. It always does. Here's what nobody tells you about buying cheap property in West Virginia. The mountains are real and they are magnificent. The New River Gorge is a national park now, the newest one in the country, and it deserves every designation it has received. The history is layered and complicated and genuinely important, the kind of history that shaped the country in ways that get acknowledged in economics textbooks, but not always in the places where it actually happened. The people are real too, and they are not what the television shows made them out to be, which should not need to be said, but apparently still does. But the cheap houses are cheap for reasons that compound. The purchase price is not the cost. The cost includes the repairs, the title search, the well inspection if there is a well, the flood insurance if you can get it, the heating bill in a hollow where the sun clears the ridge for 6 hours a day in January, and the ongoing negotiation with infrastructure that was built for a population 3 times the size of the one currently maintaining it. The opioid crisis did not happen in West Virginia because West Virginians are weak or broken. It happened because a century of extraction left communities without economic alternatives, without adequate health care, without the civic infrastructure that makes recovery possible, and then pharmaceutical companies and their distributors flooded the resulting void with pills. That is a thing that was done to these communities. It is not a thing that emerged from them. If you are buying in one of these places because you want a cheap house and a quiet life, understand what that quiet represents. If you are buying because you want to be part of rebuilding something, that is a different conversation and an honest one, And possibly the more interesting one. Carl says he has been looking at houses in McDowell County online for 3 months. I told Carl that looking at houses online in McDowell County is easy. It is the offline part that requires character. Gladys told Carl to close the laptop and take a walk. As usual, Gladys is right. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Because in a lot of these places, that is the only system that was never defunded.